maybe the idea is to have like, if we're talking conferences, like have a conference where all these professions come in and it's like, hey, today, everyone, we're going to learn how to be cognitive performance. Today, we're going to learn how to be strength coaches. And hey, maybe, just maybe, we have some actual tactical athletes come and talk to us about what they want. Because I think we get in a really bad habit of stepping into these embedded units and saying, hey, here's me, here's the service I provide. And then we wonder why nobody wants to come and work with us. It's because none of us have listened to what they want or need. Greetings, Leg Tug Nation. Welcome back to another episode of Mops and Mo's. The tables have turned this week. We, Alex and myself, were hosted. We were guests on a podcast. Alex, where did we go?
So we were guests on the Not Your Typical Doctors podcast. And as like the disclaimer going into this, what you are going to hear is an episode of their podcast. They edited it. They kind of drove it. They own it. So you'll hear their intro right after our intro. But we wanted to give you guys kind of a taste of their content. And if you like it, we'd encourage you to go check them out. It's hosted by Sarah and Alyse, physical therapist and a social worker who's in training to be a sports psychologist. And they talk about really similar topics, tactical human performance kind of stuff, but they do it from a pretty different perspective from ours. So you're going to get a different kind of set of insights, a different kind of things they focus on and all that. It was a pretty wide ranging conversation. We talked kind of all things human performance. We bounced all over the place, deliberately inflammatory as always.
Try to be. Some
common themes were like the hurdles to being truly interdisciplinary, how human performance is involved in mental health stuff, a little bit of like what the actual metrics for success are, and kind of the bureaucracy of working with the military, all sorts of fun stuff. But it was a cool conversation. I think you guys will enjoy it, and you get a taste of a little bit of a different podcast style than ours.
Enjoy.
All right. Hey guys, welcome back. Not Your Typical Doctors here tonight. I'm Alyse, one of your fabulous, the doc in training, but one of your fabulous co-hosts here with Sarah, and super special guest tonight. We are linking up with the co-hosts of Mops and Mo's. If you haven't heard from them, go check them out. Also another fabulous human performance team out there. So we have Alex and Drew. Say hi, guys.
Hello.
Oh, hey.
Oh, hey.
That was the most unimpressed hi from Drew.
Oh, hi. Can you tell they're super excited to be here? We're super excited to have them.
I'm scared to touch my microphone because it's going to start buzzing again.
I mean, that's fair. We just had 20 minutes of tech assistance that didn't exist.
That's right. Yeah. If there's a weird pause, it'll be because Drew's fixing his microphone and then he'll be back. Yeah.
It's okay.
Drew is a strength coach. He's always been a strength coach, super into muscles. Received his master's in Scotland. I'm sure there's awesome stories there about your world adventures. You are now a program director. Sounds like you've been doing that for a while. You did program director for Special Forces, Air Force. Now you're human performance program director with the Army, right? Down in North Carolina. Did I get all that right? Mm-hmm. Cool. Oh, yeah. And then Alex, West Point grad, former Army officer, no longer Army officer. But you also stumbled into human performance, did the Army thing, doing Army fitness course, right? Got your TSAC, CSCS, taught everybody how to do the Army fitness thing, and then loved it so much, couldn't go back to the regular paper pushing desk side of the house. So you got out and now you're doing human performance for the Army as well in Virginia, correct?
That's about right.
Yeah. Look at all this human performance stuff. Thank you guys for coming on. We're super excited.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's cool to be the guest on a podcast.
Yeah.
Instead of the host.
It is different. Yeah. It's a nice experience. So welcome. Welcome
Hopefully
to our
it's less
lair.
stressful. I hope it's less stressful.
And less editing for Alex.
It's true.
We'll take care of that.
But yeah, no, I think, we kind of talked about where we're going to get started, and we were just spitballing about human performance. Some of us come from Air Force, Army, the differences there. You guys, we've all kind of talked about mental health, obviously being the running theme right now, right? Everybody's trying to grab onto it, make it work. find the easy button with it. That doesn't exist either. Emotions are messy.
Yeah. And I think as soon as you put people who care into an organization, like people whose job is to worry about humans, you're going to start like finding more and more of this stuff. And as soon as you find it, you have to do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that presents a lot of challenges.
Sure. Yeah. Especially in the military, right? Because you're talking about like, we have to train these individuals to be able to do their job without emotions. But then at some point we've got to figure out that emotions they're still here, right? Like the stuffers still have emotions, even if they're stuffing them down.
We love you, stuffers.
We do.
They're
We're
our
all,
favorites.
we are stuffers as well.
Is that
so.
actual? I've never heard that term before.
Drew's
Like
gonna
listen
get
to our
confused
podcast
here.
and you would.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you listen to a couple episodes, you'll get some weird vocab that they've embraced.
The Stuffers Club. The
The
Stuffers
merch is
Club.
coming. The merch is coming.
See, and now you know, like you're laughing because you're thinking about all the stuffers you've dealt with.
Mm-hmm. That just
That's a good
stuff.
point.
They stuff until they pop. It's our stuffers, but we love them. We love them,
We
and
do.
they're crusty. They're crusty, and we love them.
I think he's probably getting way more confused.
Crusty stuffers. I'm right. I'm with you guys.
He's on board. He's on board.
But yeah, no, but you know, Alex, you bring up like you said, it's a really good point though. Like my experience too is that it's not normalized to just be human and be able to do hard things. Like and they want an easy button, and mental health, you know, it's just not as easy as processing, like, you know, I'm going to really butcher this, but go lift weights, get stronger, right? Or like go move and get well again, take a medicine and not be sick. Mental health is just a little bit messier than that. And we can't make this really pretty like framework, you know, like do this assessment, get well, do this program, get better, really, because everybody's unique. So
Yeah.
We talked about this. Alex, correct me if I'm wrong, but we did this with the Thinking About Thinking episode, talking about, well, we've done it a number of times, talking about the propensity for the tactical space to just think of everything in terms of red, yellow, green. So it's a very mechanistic worldview. And I find that has happened. I mean, if I think about the entirety of my career in human performance, and I've been guilty of this sometimes too, because it's very sexy to think of an athlete as like a video game character, and you can put numbers on everything and come up with a schematic that you can present to somebody and say, hey, here's your team. So, you know, make your choice on who's going to go where based on all these metrics we've collected. Well, where do metrics come from? Generally testing. And that makes sense in a gym environment. It makes sense sometimes in a nutritional environment. But cognitively, I think it's very difficult. You guys know this better than we do, but that has always been a struggle, trying to lay squishy things on top of or next to non-squishy things. At least in my experience professionally, the cognitive component, and I'll throw the behavioral health piece into that as well, even though I know that they're different, but that is far and away the leading cause of damage for most tactical athletes.
Oh, 100%.
We see gym injuries. Yeah, we see gym injuries a lot. We see less so, well, maybe conventional military, we see some obesity type stuff, but it's always behavioral health, and it's always the mental component. And that's the one piece that we have not yet figured out how to. I quite frankly don't think the Army or the military at large is prepared to capture that metric, nor do they know how.
right.
And this is
Well, I
now
think
me
it's just
stepping
scary.
off my pedestal.
It is,
Yeah,
but if you
no,
want
it is.
to like put it in the video game analogy, it's like what gives you your lives, right? If you don't work on your mental health or your wellness, your little wellness bar goes down for your little character, and then eventually you run out of lives. So
Wouldn't that be easy?
it's important, yeah, to kind of work on.
I think it's scary because
power up.
it's scary because I think, like you said, like once, let's say hypothetically, we could come up with something that, you know, you could like, you know, laser scan a platoon of soldiers and, oh, you're this, you're that, like from a mental standpoint, like, okay, cool. Now what? Now you have to actually invest in this idea of people first. And that, I think, freaks a lot of leadership out, because it's one thing to throw, you know, money at MWR, like, you know, gyms and things on base and do this and that and kind of give the illusion that people are first. But when you get into some of the mental health type stuff, I mean, that's a long-term investment that doesn't necessarily return somebody back to what you want them to, but you may be propping them up for a life after the mission,
Right.
and that becomes very uncomfortable.
Well, and it's also, I think again, it goes back to like that's scary, but you're also training machines,
Yeah.
so like they also have to be able to like, we want to be able to say, yeah, the human side is important, but that gets scary if it's not trained well when I ask this person to then do their job, right? And then they have to see the mission, not the person. Um, so I don't know. I guess my other thing too, though, is that like I think you could normalize it. It's interesting because you mentioned cognitive and behavioral health and that they are two separate things. I like to say I think you could simplify, like the work that we're doing in human performance, my role as an embedded clinician, I saw it more as like, if you're normalizing the conversation about mental health, you can actually do a lot more with somebody. Like I can teach you about your feelings and then be aware that you're stuffing them or you're pushing past them. But like, I think you're more empowered if you know that they're there and then just pretend like they're not know how to handle them, do anything with them, consciously choose to push past them. That creates a bigger problem on the other side versus from the beginning, like, hey, this is stress. This is your body on stress. This is your body in fight or flight. Now that you know this, you're so much more empowered to deal with it.
Well, there's like there's two conversations that come off of that topic, and I want to have both of them, but I'm gonna start with one. You used a term, I'm not gonna say I was triggered by it, but it comes up a lot. You talked about training machines, and I've heard other people like refer to service members as machines before. And so I'm gonna challenge it because I don't often hear like service members refer to each other as machines, certainly, but I think there are probably some job functions where like that might be a relevant analogy, but I think a much larger portion of their job and what they do is all about human interaction and like leading other people and motivating other people and developing other people and all of those things. And so I think like it's easy to do the comparison of just like treat them like a Humvee and make sure you know the maintenance status and what parts are on order and all those kinds of things. I just don't think it works that well. I think it creates an idea of like how we treat service members that doesn't necessarily work super great.
Mm-hmm. Isn't that interesting though, right? Like but doesn't that create part of the problem, right? If some of us are being trained to treat the person and for that person to then develop people, but then you have other people who are being raised that they are like machines or property, and then you put them all in the same group and tell them to all try and like figure out how to take care of each other, or any of them become leaders, then what do you have happen?
Well, I guess my question would have to be who's getting trained to treat them like machines?
So I think a lot of that comes from like the mission set though, because there's literally missions where certain jobs are actually referred to as a human weapon system. So when the member is told that that is their job, you know what I mean? Like you're a human weapon system, you're a human weapon system. I know we feel like when we were practicing together, we almost used that terminology so it was more relatable because they're like, well, I'm a human weapon. And we're like, okay, so let's teach you how to take care of your machine, making it more relatable versus like actually looking at them like the machine, if that makes sense.
I'm going to tell you too, like my earlier experience working with the Army, that was often a very commonly, like they were replaceable. And in my experience working with even providers, right? So like, and I would even say, I feel like this was something that we saw when I was working with the Air Force, but had to use Army services. One of my biggest problems was that a lot of those providers saw the person they were treating as replaceable. And they had to make quick decisions. Can I fix you or should we just replace you? And like, even before that, even before we were at that installation, like other jobs that I had, they were, it was how quickly they didn't really care who they were sending to the front line. That was, something else that occurred, and I know, I think maybe we're trying to pull away from that as well, but you have people still in the service right now who grew up in that mentality that these individuals were replaceable, that they were, I was introduced to the military life as a spouse reminded that I was not issued to my husband. So, property and machines are terminology that have been used, maybe not as much, but it's out there.
It's definitely out there. I've been guilty. I mean, I remember seeing it a couple of days ago from like when I posted it a year ago. And I don't necessarily think it was just like a way to communicate something, but looking at like where human performance fits into like the maintenance of the human and like trying to compare it to how we maintain equipment and weapons and things like that. And you're right that they're like optimizing the human weapon system is like the name of the program on the Air Force side and all this stuff. I don't necessarily think everybody who's using terms like that necessarily means it to like dehumanize the service member or anything like that. Certainly not.
True.
Sometimes it's a good brand. It can be sexy, whatever, stuff like that. But I think Drew and I talk about this with like strength and conditioning all the time, is that people want it to be all about like the X's and O's and like, today we're going to do 3 sets of 5 reps of 87.5% of your max, which was this. And like, it turns out that's not what it's about. And it's people that care. And that's just not like, I think the realization across all of these domains is it's a lot more about interpersonal relationships and like theories of motivation and how you get people to like buy into something and care and be passionate and all that kind of stuff.
And this might get esoteric, and I will preface this by saying I have always only ever worked with the military. I've never been in the military, but as an objective outsider, we are layering human performance onto a military paradigm that you could argue is still embedded in like World War I, World War II, where people are expendable. And it is about put as many people forward as you can and mechanize them so much so that when I blow the whistle, you jump over the trench and you run that way. And that paradigm has no room for mental health, for individual thinking, for critical thought, for any, but to get like current event with this, like when we look at Ukraine and we look at the way that war is being fought, limited communication, limited resources, whatever. Now you need autonomous individuals that can think, act clearly in all these situations. And so I think what we as providers and as folks embedded in these units are suffering from is, like you guys mentioned, we're dealing with a leadership model or a military model. Like you said, like there's no room for the individual. However, you're now hiring a lot of civilian providers. You're plugging systems into place that require addressing the individual component of it. And I think it, quite frankly, the honest answer is it's just a matter of time until we transition to like a quote unquote new military. Maybe it's smaller, maybe it's more nimble, but I think at the end of the day, you will see almost what you see in corporate America, which is the recognition of the individual. Like we have to account for, what do you want out of this role, out of this job? It's not just, hey, you should be super grateful that you work at the same bank your dad worked for. Now put on the suit and go to work. Like we've moved away from that model. The military hasn't yet, but I think that it will. It's just going to take time.
Well, and I think that's a big point of why I don't want to say there's like dissatisfaction with the results with a lot of the human performance stuff, but in this like first year, like 5-year rollout for a lot of the programs, because a lot of them are still babies, they're within their first like 5 years. There is dissatisfying in terms of like the mental health, because literally you're spending the first couple of years of standing up and running your program, breaking down that barrier you're talking about where people are expendable and they're just weapons and they're here and they've been taught not to take care of themselves. And then you're throwing these teams on them. So literally all you're doing the first couple of years is just trying to get rapport and like show why it's important. You know, I have people in my unit, it's taken me 3 years to get through to them, but now they'll finally come in and take care of themselves. But it's literally this huge process of educating and getting rapport and being like, it's okay. That's why we're here. Like we're trying to take care of you so you have longevity. I think that's probably why, or my opinion, like in the beginning, why it almost seems like there isn't a big mental health benefit to the programs yet, because we're still just trying to fix kind of or undo what has been
I don't think we know
solid.
I don't think we know what mental health, again, you guys will know this better than me, but I don't think we really even know what mental health means in general, much less how do we layer that onto a world where everyone's wearing the same uniform. Like, again, I go back to like what Alex mentioned about reps and sets and X's and O's. Like this fits very nicely into this industrial idea of human performance. But step away from that, I think as a culture at large, we're only now just being comfortable with the idea of that there is mental health. And that you can have feelings, and that's going to now factor into like if the athlete can't do the exercise, maybe it's not just because he's a bad athlete or it's a bad exercise. Maybe he's stressed out. Well, holy shit, what is stress? Like that's a whole different thing.
And importantly, the Army or the military in general has gotten away with ignoring a lot of these things for a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
And all of these programs, as far as I can tell, are mostly evaluated on can they make these issues kind of go away or become smaller, like lower rates of all these things. But there's a huge problem with like detection of these things. Like if you put a professional in, they're not going to ignore a problem that might have been easy to ignore before. My boss, his whole career before this was in athletic training.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about like one of his first roles with the collegiate football team, he set up a bed. And as soon as he had one bed, he had one injured player. He's like, well, I'll set up another bed. And as soon as he had two beds, he had two injured players. He set up a third bed. Now he has three injured players. Like, I'm not setting up any more beds. Every time I set up a bed,
no more injured.
It's injured, right? And so as soon as we like create the capacity to address these issues, we have to stop ignoring them. And like that puts the burden back on the organization to be like, because I've had a bunch of soldiers speak up who like, because of human performance, people realized they had a sleep disorder and they just didn't realize that was a disorder or that there was anything that could be done about it. They just thought that was the way people lived.
Right.
And I think we're going to see that happening in like numerous areas, mental health being one of them, but things like eating disorders and like all sorts of stuff that we just ignored before. As soon as you insert a professional who cares, who can like write it down, now you have to address it.
I mean, that's like, right. So like, I think you bring up a really great point. And I think Sarah, I think we could probably speak to the fact that you could see, you know, and we would educate to our leadership, like, hey, like it's a good thing at first when we're reporting higher numbers of usage, right? Correct. Like it actually, I need you leadership to take away that it means that there's rapport being built, that these services are going to be made, and that there are going to be questions answered for some individual that has maybe not been answered for years, right? So do not be alarmed when you see a spike in our services or possibly a spike in injury reports. It will stabilize, but it's a sign that the service is being utilized, and it doesn't necessarily mean that your people are broken. Mm-hmm. You know, I like to tell people, I like to relate mental health like just to health in general, right? So like, you know, I will explain to somebody who comes to me and they're like, I've been functioning and and, you know, now you're telling me that I'm like super broken. And I'm like, well, it's kind of like you broke your arm at one point and let it heal on its own. Right. And now you have an awareness of this broken bone that you have resiliently and like, you know, expertly dealt with because you're a survivor. And that's what we do. We're going to go back in and we're going to re-break this bone and we're going to reset it. Right. And that's going to be painful, and that's going to, you know, it's going to hurt and it's going to be tough, but the long-term benefits of that are going to pay off. And that's usually how I will talk to people about trauma, you know, especially in the military, because they will be like, I've done this for 20 years. And, you know, it's just now showing up like this. And now I have headaches and a sleep disorder and a stomach problem. And it's like, well, it's trauma. And so it's going to be really messy when we have to go in and unpack all of this stuff, but we can face it and get rid of it. Or we can continue to try and manage it and build walls and let your body continue to break down and deteriorate because of it. So, I don't know. Like I said, I think mental health should be normalized from the start as just like any other health that, you know, like, oh, you have an infection, or you have a broken bone, or you have a, you know, a tear or a strain. Mental health could be normalized in the same fashion. You know, like, and I think we got that, at least that was the environment we provided, or I worked to provide, but that also involved integration, right? So that involves 100%. The coaches, the leadership, the physical therapist, like, and the mental health person. I am not going to sit here as the mental health person and say like, I need you guys to bring me in. Like, nope, I got to bring my ass to you and make you like, I have to be a thorn in your side until you realize my value as well. Which is, I think that's sometimes a lot harder to do because we keep ourselves siloed from you and you keep us siloed from, like, we stay apart. The Army doesn't even integrate mental health into the human performance programs, you know?
Yeah, I think I was just talking to a friend last night about the book Saving Normal. I don't know if you've read it, but it's all about like the pathologizing of various things and like making them into like quote unquote diseases that might be like totally within the realm of normal responses to things. But I think we have this idea that like mental health is very binary of like either like you are mentally healthy or like you have a disorder.
Sure.
And if you're mentally healthy, you don't think about it at all. And if you have a disorder, you go see a clinician far away where we don't see what happens and you come back when you're better. And there's this like whole band in the middle. And it's the same as like every other kind of health, like you said, right? Like there are huge things we can do with nutrition and physical activity for all sorts of kinds of health, but mental health too, right? Like if you look at the literature, there's lots of things that happen in like the human performance space that are more impactful for mental health stuff than any of the medications that are available on the market. So I don't know why we like put it in its own little box and like anybody who's not clinical doesn't touch it.
Would you not argue that the military only wants to see mental health as binary?
Oh, 100%.
When I sit on like high ranking review boards for profiles and that sort of thing, it's like, okay, cool. Here's the people that need the musculoskeletal. Here's like, and here's the mental health people. They're either a yes or a no. Like
100%. No. And that's like old military thinking, I feel like, where they're like, you're either physically broken or you're mentally broken. Like you can't be both. And I think that that's something when you do have the opportunity to have mental health on your team, or even if you kind of take your own initiatives to optimize mental health, like appropriately within the disciplines that you can kind of educate on. I know when like we were in a pretty good flow state, like team wise, we would have medical meetings together to show like, here's the mental health and the MSK. Hey, here's how they blend together. Here's, the way ahead this way and that way, but it's an integrated approach ahead.
Yeah. Well, and I was to add to that too, right? I remember Sarah, cause like when we would have, and I think personally, I loved how we did this. So if somebody was denicked, if somebody was grounded, it didn't matter if they were physically grounded, they still had to see both of us. They had to see a physical and a mental component
to get returned to duty,
be able to return to duty. And and so this was like the one piece I really, and again, we kind of talked about this, right? Like, I do think that in my experience, comparing the Air Force and the Army right now, like, just because those are the two experiences I can draw from, the Air Force was starting to put mental health everywhere. And I would even say sitting on some of those profile boards, like it depended on who was sitting on the board, but they would take both the physical and the mental component and they'd put them on a spectrum. And so they would give a TBI person an opportunity to recover and return to duty. Mental health was seen as just as recoverable as a physical injury. And that was really appreciated. I really, really appreciated that they did put that on the spectrum. I never saw that. I agree with you. I never saw that when I worked in the Army. You had to fight. Like the people that I would advocate for when we were trying to get somebody to return to duty who had a mental health injury and could recover, we would have to fight, and they would have to prove their worth hand over fist to try and convince these profile individuals that they were capable of returning to duty. And that was always so like devastating, because that fight in and of itself would just devastate the character sometimes.
I think it had to do with like presentation though, because we really educated it as like, I think the easiest way I can put it, like there's physical and mental, but we were like, they're all impairments was kind of what we said to the leadership. And if it's listed as an impairment or a dysfunction, like there's a way ahead. There's a way to work on it. There's a way to get that person better. Doesn't matter if it's a mental or physical impairment or dysfunction. But either way, you can kind of make it more, approachable. That it's just an impairment.
When I was with the Army, and I don't know if Alex or Drew, if you guys have been a part of this, but when I was with the Army, it had nothing. It didn't matter the presentation. These individuals, they had to bring reference letters and they had to bring character reference letters and like they just had to like bare their soul and then hope that the person could somehow glean their ability to return to duty.
No, I appreciate that. I meant more like on the Air Force side, like when they saw it more as like, oh, okay, someone can actually get better from a mental health perspective. It was presented in like an impairment, function versus this is just a mental health issue.
I do think we're moving in the right direction. I think we've got senior leaders saying the right things and trying to do the right things. I just think there's a lot of bureaucracy that moves slower than just individual leaders being willing to change. I know one that's frustrated me recently is like the mental health component of accessions. Like a guy served in the Army for a few years, left, like while he was in the Army, sought treatment for behavioral health stuff.
Yeah.
Left, did whatever civilian thing he was doing for a couple of years, and I kind of decided he missed the Army and wanted to join again. And they would not waiver his behavioral health thing because he sought treatment. And the same thing, like as society in general reckons with mental health stuff, and like more teenagers have access to that kind of care and seek it out, those people in general, like that will prevent you from serving, right?
Yep.
It is waiverable, it's possible, but the system's not built for those waivers and like doesn't know what the standards are real well. So like the default is going to be, if you have sought any kind of mental health care, you're not going to have the option to serve.
Right. You'll have to fight or lie to get your way in 100%. And so now what we're saying is we don't want you to be well-adjusted and, mentally and physically mature. We want you to have proven to us you fought the system for 18 years.
Yeah. So we keep saying out loud that you should seek treatment and take care of yourself,
Right.
and it's totally normal and it's totally okay. But people see the way the system is built, and the system, like the message the system is sending is that you should shut up about it.
Yeah,
Very
it hasn't
true.
caught up yet.
Very true.
Like,
Both
how
in the
many things do
military.
they say out loud should be one way, and then we talk.
Yeah.
Alex and I are still kind of unpacking this conversation, which is the one about like, okay, in the Army, conventional Army, these teams are put in place to create healthy, functioning, uninjured individuals that will thrive. However, there is an uncomfortable reality, which is you are financially compensated for not thriving, not being healthy, being injured, and getting out. So how does that, like I said, this is something we're still unpacking, but it's like, how do those two worlds coexist? When I have somebody coming into my workspace on crutches, literally trying, and will tell you as much, trying to essentially use the system to be financially rewarded when they leave. But yet my job is to be there and tell him, hey, you're a tactical athlete. We're going to do this, this, and this, and get you back into the fight. Like, it's an interesting dichotomy that I think it's an uncomfortable conversation to have at like really high levels.
Yeah.
I, years ago, while I was still on active duty, tore my ACL. And almost immediately, as soon as people knew, I got a couple texts saying, what disability rating are you going for? Are you going to med board? Is this it? I was too busy watching like Adrian Peterson highlight reels about his season after coming back from ACL surgery. Like I knew it was like a fully recoverable thing and I was going to be okay. But like the culture is like, as soon as something is like sufficiently wrong with you, you take that straight to the bank.
Yep.
And like you cash in for the rest of your life.
Yeah. I think that you make a good point, right? Like we foster enablement over empowerment, so, that's a really tough, I would say that it's tough too, because there's a lot of people who came up that way. And they have not been, it has not been modeled for them differently. Those boundaries and that empowerment has not been modeled, has not been held strong. And then I think that also speaks to, here's another thing, right? Like all these different services we say are accessible, but then the reality is they're not accessible, and we're not transitioning people. Like we're not saying, hey, come serve for, do a term and then get out and have this enhance your resume, or like fill up your experience so that you are a better human for this experience. They walk away saying that they deserve something. And those services also don't add up on the other side.
I think the other thing too, to layer on top of this, that is very relevant in the news lately is like the recruiting issues. Like they can't recruit enough people. So I think it's this quality versus quantity situation where it's like, okay, if the goal is always going to be to have X many people on paper, you are going to end up with a large percentage of those folks who are going to try to take advantage of the system because they don't want to be there in the first place. They just got suckered into this because we had to meet a standard.
Yep.
If we're okay with cutting those numbers down and having a smaller force, well, then now you can focus on quality. And then maybe you don't get as many folks that just want to make money off getting hurt or, basically take advantage of a system that is very good at putting Band-Aids on things. And a lot of those Band-Aids come with financial incentives.
Yeah. I will say, having like, I fought that, like, I think being a provider on either side, like being a provider within active duty military and then the veteran side, like you can get really caught up you can get really caught up in that conversation, because you will see it when you're working active duty. You will see it pretty regularly, where you will see somebody who is the barracks lawyers, the people who are coaching enablement and coaching, kind of that like entitlement. The VA will catch on at some point. I mean, there's a lot of things that they aren't doing the greatest, but they don't take lightly to finding out you're okay.
Oh yeah, they'll review your rates every year.
And sometimes I've had like, it can get really upsetting, like when the system just it can't meet everybody's needs. It can't, get it all right. Especially with a force that's drastically bringing people in and getting rid of them, right? Like historically, the military will bring in a bunch of people when they need them, and then they will get rid of people. I mean, they just spent the last couple of years cutting down numbers, and now they sit here and they're like, we can't make numbers. It's like, because you just got rid of everybody, like we're like, oh, we don't need as many people, so we hack down our numbers. This is like, I mean, that's a constant every few years cycle that I feel like they go through. I'd like to think that we're going to do quality, but I don't. We're going to get quality a little bit, and then for some reason we're going to need more numbers, and quality is going to be the thing shelved.
Yeah, I wonder about this a lot, because I've always, like, while I was in, I always said I'd love to be a part of like a leaner, meaner force where we didn't have to like worry about quantity so much. We just like kept the people who like wanted to be there and cared about it and stuff.
Yeah.
And a lot of this ties back. This is like a callback to the very beginning of the conversation, but we use the term squishy a little bit. And in the back of my notebook at work, I have a little squishy spectrum drawn out of like all the things we worry about in human performance. And at one end, there's like the not squishy, like easy to quantify things, which tend to be like physical, like how many pounds can you deadlift and how many minutes and seconds does it take you to run and whatever. And that's what tends to get tons of emphasis, because the military loves things that are objective and quantifiable.
Right.
And then at the other end of the spectrum, there's the not so there's the very squishy stuff. And that's where like somewhat mental, but like a lot of like the spiritual stuff resides. That's where mindset kind of stuff lives. And like the more time I spend in the human performance space and the more research I look into and all that kind of stuff, the more I realize that like mindset is the foundational piece. Mindset will determine how you respond to everything else. Mindset will determine what you can get through. And I think as we reckon with this quote unquote recruiting crisis, I think we're running into some trouble of, we convince people to join the military by telling them that like, you're going to have all these cool resources and it's super sexy and super fun and all this stuff. And we forget to mention that like, it's still the military and it's going to be hard. And if somebody comes in without that, like, I expect to be challenged mindset, it's going to be a pretty bad time. Like you got to be prepared for some of that. And I think we like run the risk of like suckering people into serving without being like upfront that like, foundationally, you should want to serve because it's hard, right? Like being challenged is a good thing. And having that mindset will serve you well during and after your service.
Yeah.
But in reality, it's like a used car salesman. Like, come look at my shiny new car. And then you get in the car and realize it's really old and the gas fucking leaks and your tire's flat. And you're like, well, this ain't that fun.
You have to embrace the suck for sure. I guess like, I love that you talk, I call it, it's fluffy. You use squishy. I love squishy. But like, I will always talk to my, hard, high performing tactical athletes and talk to them of like, so what are you doing that's fluffy in your lives? Because it is important. And I think that I love that you put it on a spectrum, so that because there you can give somebody like a tangible, visual, like you need to be making sure you're filling up this entire spectrum with activities, spiritual, like all the pillars. I think, and this is, I guess, like my soapbox as, and this is why like I'm getting my doctorate in, sports and performance psychology, because I think there's a bridge, like athletes have been doing mental skills and again, they're still developing it too, but mental skills training exists. Right. And so when we talk about the hard stuff, I do believe that there is a space for mental skills. I think there is objective pieces there. Like because here's the thing, from my perspective, even what you guys are doing, even strength and conditioning, even physical therapy that is like built on objective, there's still a subjective piece, which is the mindset. that said, I think that you can make objective programs that you could normalize in the military about mental skills training to build robust athletes who know themselves and can still do hard things, and that's like, I think that we should be even taking the opportunity while we're a smaller force. And maybe that's what is happening right now with all this human performance, but we should be really developing the program from the ground up so that even the coaches are using, have a mental skills training. Like we're passing out TSACs, and CSCSs left and right. Like that TSAC should be developed to have a mental skills component. Now I've given you a leg up because you guys are coaching, you're in the coaching realm. You're seeing way more mental health than you are, right? But like now if you had some of the skills,
Yeah. And they're there. A lot of it is just like embracing what's tangible in said discipline. I feel like Alyse and I talk about this all the time, but every discipline has different entities or gray areas per se where you can really embrace to try to fill in the gaps of mental health. So either you have participants that they're not there yet, they don't want to go to mental health, but we still know it's important, or certain teams that aren't structured to have it. So you can kind of analyze where it is. A lot of it's, positive coaching, or, we've talked about psychosomatic pain. Like there's different ways through either education or mental skills, like you're saying, where you can kind of optimize what you have to work with at the time, to still try to fill that gap for sure.
I do want to clarify one thing too. We threw around objective and subjective, and I think there's a common misconception that objective things are inherently more valid than subjective things, and that's just not true.
It's not true.
And it's important. I think people in this field get that, but I think when you talk to military leaders,
I don't think they do either. I agree with you, Drew. It's probably split.
I'm sitting here listening to you guys, and I mean, we can go a number of different directions with this, and some of them, Alex, we've already gone down, but like, I'll say our profession, what I mean by that is strength conditioning. We suck at doing anything that is not strength and conditioning. And I think if you canvassed 100 strength coaches, 99 of them would not know how to account for the fact that things outside of the gym affect what happens inside of the gym. And that is an uncomfortable reality. And if you flip through any of the certifications, like you mentioned, that we hand out, because we hand them out. The barrier to entry in this industry is so low, like uncomfortably low. And like, get mad at me on LinkedIn if you want. I don't care. Like, the issue at hand is that we're teaching this idea that athletes are machines and inputs and outputs. And I mean, I've riffed on this a number of times.
Yeah.
But it's frustrating because now we look at this cognitive piece. And so I guess my question in all of this, and the question that I deal with a lot professionally, because one of the pillars that I oversee is a cognitive enhancement pillar. And, I can go to the dietitian and I can get metrics and numbers, and I can build a report off of that. I can go to the PT and I can get metrics and numbers. Strength coach, same thing. The thing that me and my cognitive director wrestle with a lot is like, how do you measure this stuff? Like, do we try to fit it into like we talked about objective, subjective, do we try to fit it into an objective box so that we can show a return on investment? Or do we spend a lot of our time, effort, and energy convincing leadership that it is actually not going to look like that? It's going to look very different. And so now we have to educate you on how to receive this data, because a lot of the times we don't really focus on educating leaders on how to receive the information we give them. We just give them the information and hope that it maps with what they already know, which, as we've talked about, is military material, like it's machines. And very little effort at all is being spent, I think, in any of these professions, educating us on how to educate other people on how to receive what we generate.
I got in a fight about exactly this at work today. Like a single digit number of hours ago, got in a fight because like we were looking at a bunch of data, and it was obvious that some of the reports were not useful reports, right? Like it was just going to generate a number that you couldn't make decisions off of. It wasn't going to paint a clear picture. And I was like, well, like if all we do is change this from a raw number to a rate, like a per capita rate, like it'll be more useful. And the response was like, well, no, like that's not, they said it had to be reported this way. Like, well, part of our job is to talk to them about how we report these things,
right,
so we can paint a clearer picture so they can make better decisions. Like if we're not having that conversation with the leaders we're presenting the information to, we're failing as the people who are responsible for like painting this picture.
Yeah, and I think it's like, there's the hardship of this is a very quantitative. Like, I don't think we're going to get out of the quantitative requirement for ever.
No,
Military's been
you're not.
numbers, so it's kind of just finding,
But you can
how to make it receptive. Because I
You
know
can
us in the
quantify subjective things though, right?
You
Like
can,
it
which
can
we
be subjective
have.
and quantified.
That's what I was gonna say, because
Yeah.
we've actually had that, right? We came into an issue in the beginning of our program a few years ago when we were trying to start a nice ROI, like how we were going to calculate it, right?
Yeah.
And we were trying to figure out how to. It was actually strength and conditioning and mental health, because mental health has a lot of PII restrictions when it comes to stuff like that. Like you really can't expose too much here and there. And we did end up turning it into, a quantitative number via percentages. It was a survey, it was a subjective survey, but we were able to prove with the usage of services that over a 6-month time frame, and then we capped it, and we actually run it twice a year now, that this percentage, it increases. So
yeah, but that's the thing, right? So because we in sports and performance psychology and mental health, like we also do research. You can have quantitative and qualitative research. You can create. I'm a big fan of a good Likert scale, right? And the reason being is because, and I think Drew, you made a really good point about the education piece. And I think it's not, and what my takeaway is, it's not just the education to the leadership, which is important, but I actually think what you're talking about too is maybe the education. And this goes back to finding common language would be it's the conversation between the mental health person and the rest of the providers, the strength and conditioning coaches and the physical therapists who are speaking. This is probably why most of them wish they could bring in psychologists, because there's a lot more of a science-based platform, right? So they're all coming in and they're like, I speak numbers. Whereas some of the LPC, like the counselors, the social workers, especially, like we're usually very much more granola, less numbers, although we do exist. But that is because when we had to create logistics, because logistics is what's going to keep a program running.
yeah.
I can educate a strength and conditioning coach. Like we can get on the same page, or a physical therapist. Like we can all get on the same page that even asking somebody about their sleep, their quality of sleep, or their pain scale, like there is a cognitive and a mental and a physical component that you can pull. The way somebody tells me the amount of pain that they're in versus the way that they answer that question to you versus how they look like they're in pain.
Huge self-efficacy.
Yeah, the resiliency scales. We so the program that we kind of developed, like Sarah was saying, right? And that's exactly what our survey did. And we normalized it. We normalized that I was going to put
Twice a year.
mental skills, mindfulness, like you even said spiritual components. So we did resiliency skills, pain scales, sleep scales. Mm-hmm. And what it does is it does exactly what we're talking about. Like you guys could even give out these scales without a mental performance person,
we can send it to
you. But what you can do is you can really start to allow your team, whether or not a mental skills person is there, to start seeing the mindset, like the occupational and mental health of your people, of your athletes. And start, and 6 months later, you take it again and you can start seeing those numbers, and you'll start seeing those numbers shift, as people are, and then people see their own numbers and they start buying into that programming even more.
Yeah. And we had like all disciplines. It wasn't just Alyse handed out. Like if Alyse was busy, the strength coaches handed it out or the PT handed it out. Like we made it just very normal. Like here, this is part of your assessment. Yeah. We do it on in-processing and then we run it twice a year.
Mm-hmm.
Through like a wing initiative, which is really nice.
I guess my question, maybe it's not even a question, it's more of a thought. Like, how do you, and I don't know the answer to this, it's not leading or anything. Like, how do you, how do you normalize that? Because as much as we like to think we are, none of us, not us four, but just people aren't good at being multidisciplinary. Like in every human performance team I've worked on, if you really, really got uncomfortable with it, I would argue that each pillar probably thought that they were the primary pillar. And then everybody else was in a supportive role. So
it's a problem. I think my soapbox is it's a huge problem. Like you can't have ego to have a successful program.
I agree. But my thought is we almost like your questionnaires. I'm with you. I think they're great. I think a good questionnaire is solid. And if done well, it gives you the information that you want. But there's always that what if of like, I'm handing you a questionnaire. You now know you're taking a questionnaire. So you now know I'm trying to get something from you. Strength and conditioning, same issue. We're running a baseline week. You now know that you're baseline testing. So you are going to super maximally perform because there's a whole lot of stuff that's going to go into you psyching yourself out to give me these numbers. And then I'm going to program off those numbers. So for me, the fix is, okay, how do I build that stuff into just your day to day? So you don't even realize that I'm assessing you. You don't realize that I'm analyzing this, taking information from it and acting. So I guess my question or my thought is, from a cognitive enhancement, cognitive performance standpoint, how do you normalize that stuff so that it's not just some silly game that we've built into your workout, or it's not a questionnaire that we hand you before you do X, Y, or Z, or it's not just in process? I think that stuff exists and is good, but until it just becomes part of the fabric of human performance, such that we aren't even labeling ourselves as strength coach, PT, like we have disciplines and doctorates, and that's great, but to the athlete, none of that stuff should really be visible beyond the veneer of just like, hey, this is human, this is what you do because you chose to be in the military as a quote unquote tactical athlete.
I mean, I think so. And again, I think that comes back to it's the right person, right? Which I think is still a huge problem too. Like
that's a huge problem.
The way, like it takes a unique person. I think that even after you've hired a unique person, that person still should be put through some sort of basic training, to really understand the culture they're getting into, because, I would even say, like, if you've served it or you've married it, like working for it still looks different. And so I think normalizing it comes down to the people you hire, which again, we could all probably go off, because I think you made a really good point, Drew. And we continue to say that too. Like, I actually have gotten into an argument with somebody who told me that, multidisciplinary is awesome and everybody gets together and kumbayas. And I was like, you're full of shit.
Oh God.
Because I know so many programs that don't function.
Yeah.
They don't function because everybody thinks that they are the only person in the lane that is necessary. And and at some point, and it only takes one to get everybody on board saying, well, fine, you think you're the best person, I'm the best person. And now nobody's talking to anybody. A good functioning team, they're rare. I'm proud to say that I was on one.
I know,
where we had and we developed and normalized. So at in processing, you were given this piece of paper, and you're right. They probably were like, I'm questioning it. I'm skeptical. And their numbers, and we'll give credit that the numbers might be weird. We gave it to them, like, Sarah was saying, twice a year. And so the first couple of times, I could absolutely agree that some of their numbers may not have been honest. They don't trust us. That's fine. I can build that into an expectation of those answers. But then if we start giving it to them twice a year, if we give it to them when they return from a deployment, or even when they get ready, you're in the business of getting paperwork and assessments all the time. So at some point it becomes normalized and the numbers will change, and so you don't. And that's through education, that's through delivery. It does come back to the human performance team, which is definitely a huge soapbox of both of ours.
Aside from the integration, it really just comes down to rapport, right? Yeah. Like why does anybody that participates in a human performance program want to do anything? It's until they get buy-in and they have trust that the program is going to help them. So I think a lot of it falls on outside of the integration, but just the provider's ability to create rapport, to kind of educate on it or stress what it is or why it's actually important or what it actually means. We have people that they'll want to go over their answers. They'll be like, hey, can you talk me through this? Like, what does it mean? Can we compare the one from 6 months ago? How can I improve myself in these areas? Because they're interested now, because there's been there's a rapport there. So they understand that it's valuable because of the rapport. Like the rapport is able to be a nice support to kind of help push through valuable measures or just subjective anything.
For any of the big old nerds out there, the Journal of Special Operations Medicine has done, there's like a solid amount of research published in there about interdisciplinary teaming stuff. A lot of it is by the great folks at CHAMP, Consortium for Health and Military Performance. But yeah, free advertising. You're welcome.
Our other research organizations.
But they, like when I first started working with them and talking to them, there was a lot of talk about like psychological safety and team building stuff. Mm-hmm. And we put some of that stuff into like the curriculum we were working with. And at first I kind of thought it was cheesy. Like I thought it was like overplayed, like everybody gets it, team building stuff, whatever. And it quickly became obvious that was the most important thing we do.
100%.
Like it can seem dumb, but like I promise, like break out the class. I just like Google team building exercises and do some of them. Like it is not overrated in any sense. Like if you work in an interdisciplinary organization of any kind, absolutely take the time regularly, monthly at least probably, and do some like dedicated work on making sure the members of your team feel safe expressing dissent and feel like willing to share their voice and all those kinds of things. Like that's you would think so much of the resource would hinge around like how to measure cognitive performance, like we just said, or like what programs would work the best. It's none of that. It's how do professionals in this space collaborate effectively?
Absolutely.
That's 100%. The meat of all of the literature, and there's a reason why, and it's so important.
It's really the only way to get the success, honestly. I'm not going to listen to anything you say if I don't trust you. I don't care if you're spitting gold and you've written in journals and whatever. If I don't trust you, it doesn't matter.
Anyway, so I don't know why that's some big barometer of success.
I didn't know. Has he written in a journal? That was just like a joke. Oh, okay.
That's not true. But
our big pillars rapport for sure. On top of integration, I feel like we beat
and approachability
which goes to the rapport. Like you got to be approachable. You can't be a stick in the mud.
Everybody. You have, and that's you bring up a great point, Alex. You have to be approachable to everybody. You can't just be approachable to your client and be an asshole to your team. Like that's. It will eventually circle back around and bite you in the ass. Like,
well, they're very observant. Like they're going to notice. They're going to be like, "Wow, he's cool with me, but he's a dick to everybody else." You know.
Yeah.
So,
how nice. for you guys, working like, because I, coming like, who's your cognitive mental health, like whatever you want to call them, right? Like you come across somebody, and. Okay, great. Like you want to say that you don't know how to handle it because it's emotions and they're scary, or we don't know if we're dealing with something bigger, or sometimes people don't come to you until they're broken. But who are you going to?
Drew, you want to answer? You want me to?
I mean, from like a conventional army, the way that the model is built now, like the cognitive performance pillar is run by an occupational therapist. And that is in and of itself hit or miss because it's a little bit outside of their scope. And I am very, very, very fortunate now to have a very, very, very good one. I've had a less good one in the past. There is space for some additional positions through contracts and whatever that are a little bit more what you would probably think of as like a sports psych position. But it's glaringly obvious of all the pieces in place for, again, this is only speaking about conventional army, but of all the pieces in place, that is the pillar that has the most kind of what if, the most squishy, which we've talked about.
Yeah, I'll take Drew's and elaborate a tiny bit. I think, so like you said, we got occupational therapists, some of whom have a background in this kind of stuff, not all of whom have a background in that kind of stuff. There is a contracted role for a cognitive performance specialist, but that's certainly not a clinical behavioral health role. It's definitely more like mental performance, cognitive performance kind of stuff. And that's like one of them for a brigade of whatever, 400 to 800 people.
Brigade of 800?
Chaplains certainly play a role in behavioral health stuff, but again, depends on their background. Did they get training in that space? Like there's the like pastoral care training stuff they can kind of do. There's all sorts of like little one-off trainings, but they are not at the end of the day fundamentally a clinical health care provider.
Yeah.
Most, but not all brigades have embedded behavioral health teams already. In theory, these performance teams should be coordinated with those folks, but in most cases, those folks are so backlogged with like severe clinical kind of stuff that they don't have the bandwidth to coordinate with people who are doing performance kind of stuff. I think like Drew said, I think it's one where there's like still question marks out there of how do we address this kind of thing. We've seen some success of a few brigades have been able to like coordinate pretty well. The like not quite clinical, but in the mental domain people are able to like build a rapport with the embedded behavioral health folks. And they can say, hey, I have identified that this situation is important. I know you don't have any available appointments for X number of weeks, but I need to get this person in pretty fast. that stuff has happened, but that's not a permanent solution to the problem, right?
Yeah.
Do they outsource it all? Like, do the teams outsource or educate for like the MFlex or the R2 programs and stuff too? Or are you just solely if you have cog specialists or embedded?
I mean, I think
That's the issue. I mean, really, the issue is nobody knows what cognitive performance is. Like they throw it around. It's a cool buzzword, but it's like, okay, cool. Like, and again, not to like bash anybody, but from what I've seen, this organization is very good at putting big words on big. But it's like, okay, so what? Like, what does that mean? What does that actually mean?
Right. Well, and now, yeah.
Reps and sets, but for cognitive performance, it's like, what is that? I see the books on your shelf, and I see, the studies and that sort of thing. But like at the end of the day, the soldier comes to see you and then they leave. Like, what objective? Not even objective. Like, what change have you made, and how can we?
Yeah.
We know what it is. It's how fast can you click the buttons on the whiteboard?
Right, and that's what everybody just goes down to.
Well, and I think I hate. It's a very pretty title.
It's the coolest title in human performance.
It's super cool, but I do agree. I think that it would be a better title. Like I think mental skills trainer would be better, like, or a mental skills coach, because they're really. But so what I was going to say too
is a soldier more likely to go to a cognitive performance expert or a mental skills coach?
I actually think that they would probably be more apt to go to a mental skills coach. I personally think, because the name feels more approachable. And like, it also sounds, but I'm going to back up though real quick too and say, I'm curious, like, and this goes back to onboarding, orientation, in processing, the people we're bringing on. But like, if I'm an MFLEC, right, I have just as much responsibility as you, as the coaches or the human performance director, to know each other. Right. I have just, and so like, cause on an installation, you're going to have a ton of MFLEX who a lot of them are just sitting around doing nothing. And there's some really great skill sets out there. Right.
We've come full circle a little bit on the like teaming competencies thing though. Cause we know it's already a big enough challenge to get a team that has one single director on the same page and like get them to like see it as a common mission and things like that. When you start talking about, we like every time we visit somewhere and like talk to teams, we talk about like, how are you coordinating with this organization? How are you coordinating with this organization? I hope you have good relationships because they'll help you and you'll help them. But you all have different bosses and you're being evaluated on different metrics and like you're involved in different meetings and it becomes very difficult very quickly. Like we can talk about all these resources that are everywhere, but like when you're like neck deep in whatever problem you're dealing with, you're probably not going to call people in all sorts of other organizations to figure it out. You're going to try and solve it with the resources you have. And it can be really, really hard to like build those relationships. Like once we've embedded it, how do we like pull in the people who weren't embedded? And it's
that's the key. I think that the key is the embedded piece, because for all intents and purposes, all the resources you mentioned are others. I mean, they're outside there. It's not your platoon. It's not your company. It's not your battalion. I mean, we have the advantage of now being quote unquote embedded, but we're still called something different. Like it still has its own label and shield and brand. And so for a soldier, it's very easy to just create cognitive dissonance between this is my company, this is my battle rhythm, this is what I'm doing. I don't have time to go deal with the others, even though there are a ton of resources. Anybody looking from the outside in will see that. But if I am so task saturated that this service isn't just part of my task saturation, I'm not going to have the time or the energy to go and deal with it.
Go ahead.
So I was going to also bring up, like, I didn't mean to, to not spiral into like getting to know your team, but like
you spiral into everything.
Your cognitive performance specialist. And I know this because this is the role that I am currently training and educating in. And as a therapist, like trying to be the bridge to both sides, but a cognitive performance specialist should be trained to be able to have somebody walk into their office and to assess what part of their problem is mental skills and what part is mental health, and to understand their lane and to outsource when needed. Right. So like essentially your cognitive performance specialist should know all of their behavioral health. That is a part of their role. And I'm not saying we know
I think they got that locked down. I think we just
good.
have a shortage of people to refer to.
Well, I think they got it locked down. But I think what happens is the customer /soldier / whatever you call them, they don't care. They see a resource and they go address it. And if that resource tells them, hey, I'm not the person, you need to go over there, you just created a friction point.
Agreed.
Yeah, but I think that comes back to what I spoke to earlier about like expanding in the gray area of, because I truly believe that each discipline has a little bit of area in their scope that would be considered cognitive skills, right? Like coaches, you guys can do positive coaching. PT can do different types of neurorehabilitation stuff. Social workers are social workers. OTs, they have the cognitive skill stuff. So I think if it's a lack of resources, in my opinion, it goes back onto the teams, where the teams need to be comfortable strengthening like their gray areas and working on them. So then you can keep building the rapport. And then when the person says, hey, by the way, we've started, you have a rapport, maybe then they can shift them down the road, because then they're buying into what the mental skills or whatever you're trying to push, depending on their deficit, is. And it kind of goes back to rapport in that gray area.
Yeah. Yeah. You can be a coach and you can talk to your client about being human, and like you can, because, and and again, right, we're going back to like team dynamics, which is really where it starts. And I think that's probably a huge thing that you as a director, are really trying to probably facilitate. But it was super important for me. Like, it's super important that if my coach comes to me and says like, hey, I think so-and-so is dealing with this, right? And for either one of us to realize that that person is not walking into my office because I have mental health slapped on my forehead, right? We now have a unique opportunity where I might need the coach to be the vehicle. Like I might need that coach so it might be great for me to educate the coach on things that, talk about this. Here's the warning signs, right? Here's where you have to bail out, right? Right. And so let's educate and get a little bit comfortable in the uncomfortable gray. That might be able to help, that coach might help escort that person to the appropriate resource, which might be mental health. Or it could be just a very human problem that they need validated. And that is something that the coach or the PT or the athletic trainer, whoever, can take care of on their own.
I think so for me as a strength coach, the frustrating piece of that is you look at the lineup for any of our leading conferences and the keynote speakers are talking about agility drills. No one is talking about,
hey man, they can invite whoever they want. I agree with
you. I think it's just frustrating.
I'm available.
Call us.
Like, hey, now
you're
we're
right.
talking about, how to do eccentric, isometric, who gives a shit, but we don't have the time or the energy to have someone come in and address at large, because
you're right.
This is a biased opinion. I think, I'll be honest, I think it's a biased opinion as a strength coach, but my experience with human performance and special operations and conventional is that a large portion of it happens and takes place in the gym. That's for most military athletes, that is their entry point, because that's something they know and are familiar with, and everything else sort of spiderwebs out from that. And so to me, it's a real disservice to this idea of tactical human performance that the certification, the industry, whatever you want to call it, is not putting front and center this idea of, hey, as the coach, being multidisciplinary should be at the forefront of your mind. The reps, sets, exercise selection does not matter so much as your ability to recognize the fact that, hey, that soldier, from the way he's approaching his session today, probably needs to talk to somebody, and it's probably not you. And so you have the rapport built with the rest of the team, like we've been talking about. But again, from what I've seen, that is a skill set that only intrinsically motivated, high-performing, critical thinking coaches are taking on themselves. It's not something that's being taught as part of this larger idea.
Drew, you're dangerously close to suggesting that we're not going to get our way out of these problems with velocity-based training and force plates.
100% not. Welcome to the dark side.
Coaches spent as much time investing in this idea of being multidisciplinary as they do writing virtue signaling posts on LinkedIn. We would be in a much better place as an industry. And I will take all this shit.
We're going to be pariahs.
For that comment.
Or just understanding like the compound effect of just self-efficacy, right? Like just having a conversation with someone and giving them a little confidence boost, like that goes a long way. Not tearing them down in the gym. And
you can accomplish that by helping them pick up a heavy object, right? You totally can. You can show them that they have that self-efficacy in the gym. And like, guess which is going to have more impact on their life? The 5 pounds they added to their max, or the self-efficacy they carry with them 24/7.
Exactly. That's why it starts in those gray areas. For sure.
Like you can have all of like, my problem, I think, is that this is my opinion, is that is mental health feels too, again, like it's, crunchy or granola or squishy, that like that none of these hard individuals, coaches, athletes, whatever, feel like they can bring it in an approachable way, right? Like that self-efficacy, that psychological basic need, it can be very approachable, and it can be very simple, like you just said, right? Like working with somebody on their form or pushing somebody to pull that last rep, like that self-talk that you are modeling, I don't really care if it's negative or positive so much as it's productive, right? Like if that person, if that person and they need you to coach them through those last few reps, and it has to be, don't suck, and it has to be a little bit more colorful. If you understand that person and that's productive for them, okay. Right. But like, that's also knowing your client, which is supposed to be, you should know that role as well, like that as a coach, right? Like you should be able to address their form, and you have to involve the person in the program you're coaching, right?
Yeah, it should be the standard, really.
Please don't get me started on that.
So, okay. So let me ask you guys, I'm curious, I'm curious.
Alex being like,
how do you, because we talk a lot, like we constantly talk about it. And sometimes I think that I am still the woman with mental health slapped across her forehead, which is why I can't get some of these really awesome, special men friends to take me seriously. How do you guys suggest, how do we break, like, what are we doing? Do I have to stomp down the door of a conference and grab the keynote speaker's microphone and, but like what do you guys, what are you guys like saying? What is the suggestion? Where do we start? Cause I think it's with the team.
I mean, you started a podcast about it. That's a pretty good way.
It's true.
We did. Yeah. It's our soapbox.
The next point is to grab microphones and start talking. But but what are you guys
saying? My naive and hopelessly optimistic opinion on this is that the message from all the industries towards the athlete, because right now none of our industries are athlete centric, they're provider centric. Like you get the certificate, you get the letters after your name, that's cool, you go deal with whoever. But I think it needs to be flipped around, and all of the professions really need to recognize that, sure, you might wear the shirt that says strength coach on it, that's great, but you also have to have a percentage of your skill set be nutrition, be physical therapy, be and the vignette I give all the time with this is when I started as a strength coach, I was 23 years old, right out of graduate school. I'm sitting in a meeting next to an orthopedic surgeon and an athletic trainer and a physical therapist talking about an athlete. If I can't speak their language, I don't contribute to that meeting. And as a strength coach, there's already a stigma that you're some big dumb idiot that just likes to lift weights. There's a certain percentage of our industry that like loves that stereotype. And it's on Instagram, and there's hashtags for it, and there's special months where we only do one exercise, and we love that idea of just being
this month.
We love just being the coach, and that's cool. That worked really well in like 1990s collegiate athletics. But I think we're at a point now where unless we can identify with these other industries, and I say that as a strength coach, I think those other industries are just as guilty of it. Like I'll talk with dietitians, whatever. At the end of the day, the only way I have seen programs run effectively is if all the providers have some literacy with how to train well, because that's where you're going to meet your athlete, is more than likely in the gym, except for the odd case when someone wanders into your office. But that's generally like a self-motivated person in the first place.
It's odd. They're self-motivated or broken.
They're broken. Yeah.
For example, the best chaplains that I've worked with work out next to the dudes. The best cognitive performance people that I've worked with work out with the guys, the best dietitians, et cetera. And so I think maybe the idea is to have like, if we're talking conferences, like have a conference where all these professions come in, and it's like, hey, today, everyone, we're going to learn how to be cognitive performance. Today, we're going to learn how to be strength coaches. And hey, maybe, just maybe, we have some actual tactical athletes come and talk to us about what they want. Because I think we get in a really bad habit of stepping into these embedded units and saying, hey, here's me, here's the service I provide. And then we wonder why nobody wants to come and work with us. It's because none of us have listened to what they want or need.
Yeah.
I don't know if
So-
that's a question, but that's just my thought.
That was a pretty good
No.
mic drop.
It was. It
moment.
was.
My
I
mic's not really
actually,
working, so I can't drop it.
Pretty
Or you
good
can
laptop
drop it because it's fair game.
And drop it. Okay.
I actually think you. So you bring up. You know, I remember on my first day, at the last unit where Sarah and I worked together. That was actually, you bring up a really good point that that's something so simple you can do. I spent a day. I actually spent several days, but I spent several days with the coaches. You know, like so because I mean. You know, you set up with a military installation, you're probably on like a visitor's pass and you have no real rights to do anything. So use that time to spend a day in the life, right? Like exactly like what you said. I spent a day in the life. I will never forget.
We used to drag you everywhere. The movement assessments.
yeah.
We're like, we're going in the field. Let's go.
I
And Alyse
I
would
always
suit
made
right
it was
up and
I always made I was very
great.
adamant, right? So like my first couple of days in was one of the movement assessments and I sat there and took pictures of guys with
Of
their
posture.
shirts off and like body fat and everything. And I remember sitting there going, I don't know if this is the greatest job I've ever had or if I should question like how hard I've worked on mental health to be sitting here in a gym. But you know what? I'm here for it. But yeah, but it was, and I was very adamant about, I spent a lot of time in the physical therapy office with Sarah. I went out to the field all the time. I had no problem assessing somebody really anywhere, right? Take me up to the sim. I'll assess you there. Let's go out to the field. I'll watch how you shoot. You know, like I rucked not well, but I did it. And, you know, but like, maybe that's what it is. Maybe the first step is that these, you know, if you want to be a better team, that you should spend a day in the life.
No, I think it's,
Build
I
a
think that
rapport.
was spot on. I think really the challenge is, and we talked about ego with this a little bit, but like there's an expectation, I think, with a lot of providers that their clientele elevate themselves to the level of a provider. Here's me with my degrees and my experience. You know, I'll bash nutrition, dietitian types a little bit here. Like if a soldier calls you a nutritionist, guess what? You're a nutritionist right now. And if you turn around and tell them I'm actually a dietitian,
Yep. You've lost.
Oh, you lost it. Yeah. You're
Right.
out.
that is one thing that infuriates me. But I think like your point, and I don't want to say lower yourself to the level of the athlete, because I don't think it's a lowering necessarily. It's just a mindset shift of like, I don't care how many schools you went to, how many degrees you have. If the place where you meet that athlete is out in the field with a ruck on,
Mhm.
how you're doing your job.
Totally.
Meet them
Yeah.
where they are.
Humble
Totally.
yourself.
You have to.
I have totally been the person lifting the least amount of weights in the weight room, but it was to be present.
Lifting weights in the weight room though. And that's,
Right. That was it, you
Mhm.
know, and or the ruck.
Mhm.
I felt that for so many days afterwards. I mean, I didn't show any of them that when I left. Like
No.
nobody was seeing me limping away. But that's, you know, but that you're right. You have to humble yourself. You really have to humble yourself. And I hate the emphasis on the letters. We talk about that all the time. Like I'm
all the
literally
time.
I'm adding letters to the end of my name to have credibility when it shouldn't be.
There should be a law that you can only have like 2 letters. Like
It's
some,
silly.
a cap. I love it.
Yeah. Like I was literally just talking about renewing or redoing my CSCS because I did it when I was in college. Like I'm a college student. But
Yeah, we were-
it's to the
yeah.
point now where it's blocking me. They're like, well, you're not a strength conditioning specialist. I'm like, well, I was, but you know, like it's kind of crazy how there's a lot of
I think
emphasis
that's a
on
really
that
good point.
when there's a lot
Well,
of blended areas anyways.
do you think, I'm going to ask a really bold question as coaches, right? And so like you've been a coach, Drew, for a really long time, but like, do you think that, like, to flip the script, do you feel like you have providers who come in who act like they're above you because they're quote unquote providers?
yes, 100% all the time. I think
Yeah.
I think my joke with this is that this was when I was with the Air Force. First of all, everyone wants to be a pilot. PTs want to be surgeons, ATs want to be PTs. Everyone wonders why the strength coach gets all the business. It's because, yeah, we exist in a medical model. And in order to do well in that, obviously it helps to have an MD or what have you after your name. That's great. I think doctors are cool, but there's this, I want to figure out how to phrase it well, because it is admittedly somewhat of a bold opinion to have. I think if in the medical space, there's this assumption that you know all the things. And so, you know, nutrition, you know, strength and conditioning, you know, because you're medical. But I think if we reframe it to a performance lens and put the athlete first, then now the strength and conditioning specialist, whatever you want to call them, because some guys don't even call themselves that because of the stigma and the stereotype. That person becomes a lot more important. And Alex, we had an episode on this. I don't remember who exactly we were talking to. The idea of changing this idea around strength and conditioning, maybe it's more of like we even changed the name of it, I think.
Are you talking about when we talked to Dan about like strength coaches' roles in public health? And
yeah. Because I think everything in strength and conditioning really is based off of dead Russians or football coaches. And there's a stigma associated with that I think does give us a little bit of a disadvantage when we're sitting across the table from people that are high and mighty medical providers. The conundrum that we deal with, though, is that strength coach has more face time with more athletes than any of those people. And I'm dealing with folks that aren't necessarily broken. Some of them are high performing, and there's lessons to be learned from that environment too, that may not just carry over from me sitting, listening to someone talking about people that are only broken.
Right.
So again, the short answer to your question is yes. I think that there's a chip on the shoulder dynamic of like, you don't understand me, I don't understand you. I'm not going to take the time to understand your profession because you don't take the time to understand mine, and you end up in this just circle of like, no one is actually here to help the athlete. We're just here to beat our chests and get letters after our email addresses.
I think that goes back to what you said about like team building and rapport, like within your own team, because I've seen that. I also feel like, that I put that own observation together just because of how I've been treated by coaches. And, it does feel like it comes down to bad experiences and that siloed experience where we can't all just like
get along.
Why can't we get along? Kumbaya. Hold hands.
No, that's a good point. No, I get
in trouble for that, but I think I just get so tired of everyone thinking that everything's going well, and it's not. I mean, compliance. I
agree.
The one, we talked about this at the beginning, and not to totally change the subject, but at the end of the day, the only metric that matters is compliance. And if you really pick at a lot of these programs, even the ones that have been around for a decade or more that have really fancy gyms and providers, like, what's your compliance? 10%. Well, then what are you doing? Like, you're responsible for this many 100 or 1,000, whatever, and only 10 of them use your services. Like, I don't care how many barbells you own. Like, you are not running a good program.
No, nobody's showing up.
Nobody has those conversations because we can all hide behind the fact that we're the cool kids on the block that have all the fitness equipment.
Drew's just here to make enemies.
I'm here for, I'm here for those bold statements. That's why I asked the bold question, because because that's a part of the problem, right? Like, a part of the problem is that you have a bitter coach and an elitist provider who show up to a table and have and there you mentioned too, right? They're provider centric. Nobody's sitting there thinking about meeting the athlete's needs. Right. Their ego is already in front of them. And
well, I say it tongue in cheek and intentionally a little bit bold, but I think it's like with anything, right? If embedded human performance exists in the military to solve a problem, that's why it's here. In order to solve any problem, you have to first start with a problem statement. And I don't think as a collective whole, we've really sat down and been honest with ourselves of like, what is the issue? The issue is, how do we get people to walk into the door? It's not what do we measure. That's after the fact. If they're not even walking in the door, none of it matters. And I don't think that we've really sat down and looked at ourselves collectively in the mirror and said, hey, how do we make an environment where people want to be here?
How do we measure performance, and how do we measure effectiveness?
How do we measure effectiveness? Yeah.
True.
Look at that.
I'm gonna get in so much trouble. It's whatever.
I'm excited for this now. This is like the stuff that needs to get talked about that doesn't.
It is.
Oh yeah, that's like a whole nother episode because we've gone on tangents with assessments and.
Well, I think I know I keep starting all these things with I think, but recognizing that we're in an environment where it is very cyclical. And so if you're active duty, you're in a place for 2 years and then you leave. It's not like the NFL where if you don't win, you're gone. So a lot of people have been able to hide behind the fact that there's rotational leadership and there's a lot of money, quite frankly, that we can spend on a lot of fancy things, and we can avoid the question of, hey, what are you doing? Because I've entertained generals and gyms and they all want to say, oh my God, you guys have really nice racks. Thank you. How many guys use your service? No one ever asked me that. How many guys use your service? Because they don't even think of it that way. And I think, again, everybody on LinkedIn posting pictures of their gym and all that and things, like, cool, that's great. I'm glad that you have a facility. But like Alex and I talk about this all the time, like, can your coaches get a platoon of soldiers fit with sandbags in a field? But the bigger question is, are those soldiers even going to show up to hang out with that coach on the field because he only has sandbags? Like, that to me is the squishy stuff that no one's really asking.
Yep.
And until we do that, we're really just going to be running around in circles.
Drew knows this well, but like essentially I do all this stuff because my hobby is picking fights on the internet. And the easiest way I have found to get a fight going with a bunch of strength coaches is to suggest that it might not all be about the facility.
I don't think any of it's about the facility.
I don't think it has to be.
Well,
like,
and
some of the most successful years are the least resourceful. Sometimes, if you look back to teams, like, it's them actually being resourceful that helps the integration and like make it as successful. Doesn't necessarily be the facility as well.
We plan to have like we've workshopped it a little bit. We might have some kind of like roundtable discussion on the topic of like facilities and what's necessary and what's not and all that kind of stuff. But I think the general trend is that facilities seem to come as a result of belief in the system. Not you don't get facilities and then people start believing in the system. That kind of investment comes from established belief in the system, and that comes from people who care about what they're doing.
Yeah, I would agree. Start resourceful. Yeah.
Garage gyms. Most of these guys have access to MD. Like, there are other facilities in the world besides the one that someone's going to magically build for you. Your job is to create a person that wants to go to any facility, whether you have one or not.
It's a positive environment.
Intrinsic motivation.
Exactly.
Some of the most famous, most successful strength and conditioning facilities in the world are like grungy garages.
Yeah, they look like a garage. Yeah.
Like,
Yep.
I mean, my last office with the military was a broom closet.
It was a mop closet.
And I
when I started with the military, was on a bench.
Yeah.
And it was fine. Whatever.
I made the most out of that broom closet.
My boss's office is a broom closet. So like, who knows what I'm doing?
Yeah. No, I think that's, again, that is, I really appreciate that you guys are making those statements, right? Because that's the conversation we're trying to have as well. That like, we sit here and we have this model and we have this idea, but the problem, again, going back to what both of you said, is we're not making the team work.
No, and
we're
the
not
program's suffering.
Yeah, like, we have a great idea, but we're covering it up with facilities and equipment and letters, and we're not getting even, we're not team building and trust falls.
Trust falls. I'll catch you.
We need to get everybody out to the obstacle course on the human performance team and
go
work.
Trust fall all over.
Well, I appreciate your guys' time. We're so glad you made time to come on, because we know you're busy with your own thing.
You what? True.
Apologies if we were inflammatory.
No, not at all. Not at all. We thought this was a great discussion. We should do this again.
Sorry, my mic broke.
You can apologize for that. That's okay.
If I know anything about how like the podcasting / like broader social media world works, it's the more inflammatory, the better. So
yeah.
Should be all right.
We're here to make waves. Like,
we like to be controversial.
Yep. I'm here. We worked in it. I still love it. I still believe in it. I would absolutely jump back into it, but I will, even if I'm in it, I will still scream about the things that need to be fixed
all the time.
That's why but I think that's what makes those programs good. And that's what brings evolution to these programs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Professionally annoying is what I call it. I'm just professionally annoying.
Yeah. That's why I don't wear the uniform, so I can be professionally annoying.
Yeah. But no, we appreciate you guys. And hopefully we'll have you back and we can have, I feel like we came up with like 3 or 4 other episodes just out of this conversation. So
right? I know.
We'll make it happen. We'll have it back, or vice versa or something. It was great.
Absolutely.
Yeah. For sure.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Love the conversation, you guys. Like, thank you for, coming on, being controversial, inflammatory, all those things.
That's what we do.
Yeah. Right. I hope to do it again. All right. Well, yeah, you guys, everybody check out Mops and Mo's. go listen to them and on their, the rest of their inflammatory conversations that they have on a regular basis. But until next time, everybody, talk to you later.